So, greetings, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today, watching us live on LinkedIn for the 60 episode of Talk to Your Meeting Doctors. Wow, 60 episodes talking about meetings, how to make them more effective, how to make them more human. Wow, we covered so many different angles on meetings. Martin, maybe you could step in now and finalize what we are going to talk today, while I'm sure our two guests will be able to introduce themselves in a few seconds too. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Great to be here for our 60th episode. It's amazing. It's amazing to think that we've done that many. Almost as old as myself, which is which is a good milestone to have hit. We've traveled a good few roads, Paul, in the name of organizational meetings, and over the course of time, we've had a lot of do's and don'ts from a lot of our guests. And at your suggestion, which I think is an excellent suggestion, we thought we might just do a reflection on what still does not actually change in organizational meetings. So for all of the talking and thinking and writing and podcasting, we're just wondering what's still out there that's to be changed about meetings, and what should we go about changing? What can we do about it? We've got two fantastic guests. Michelle, you're rejoining us from our last episode. It's wonderful to see you back. And Amanda Hamilton is joining us at the suggestion of Michelle. And perhaps you guys want to tell us about how you actually met up, which is a little bit serendipitous as well.
Shall I do it, Amanda, or you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So yes, the serendipity was undeniable, I think, in our meeting. In November of 2025, there was the annual Web Summit Tech Conference in Lisbon, Portugal. And it's about 70,000 attendees. It's one of the largest technology conferences in the world. It's also where I met Paul. So the connections just keep coming. But we had reached out to Amanda before we ever got to Lisbon, because we noticed alignment across both our businesses for ways that we could possibly work together. Restore being a biotech solution that identifies high-performing cognitive hours, and Amanda bringing to Portugal a solution about having better meetings. And we thought there would be some great conversation there between us. And she was actually the first conversation that we had over coffee in Portugal. And then in a just constant serendipity, kept seeing each other, visiting each other's booths, and then on the same flight home. And so after we connected here at Meeting Doctors, I can't think of a better guest to share with you, because her expertise is in efficient meetings. And I bring in a little bit more of like that biorhythms lens about when to have meetings, but Amanda is really what makes a good productive meeting. And that is so exciting for today.
Super. Great.
Super.
Amanda, we've already hit Michelle with this particular question the last time. We don't announce it in advance, but is there something about yourself or your background that you would feel comfortable sharing with us, but that a lot of people might not be particularly familiar with or au fait with? Anything at all, just something from your own personal background.
My own personal background. A fun fact about my personal background is I have a technology company that I'm building better meetings and, making every meeting count. I also own an agency where we provide executive assistant services to other businesses, which is a lot of what transpired into me building this company. But a fun, interesting fact is, in my prior life, I spent 10 years working in corporate retail, working across time zones across the world, sat in a ton of meetings, and worked a very different life than I do now. So just like a fun, interesting shift in dynamic and career, essentially, over the last several years. So,
Well, if my career is anything to go by, you possibly have another 2 or 3 shifts and changes to go before you reach my stage of retirement. So it's
I can't wait.
yeah, well, I tell you, I've got 4 grandchildren actually waiting outside so I'll have a hard stop on the top of the hour as well, Michelle. Don't worry about it. They'll see to that.
That's
guys,
fantastic.
it's fantastic to have both of you here. Thanks a million for agreeing to join us. So what still needs to change in meetings and how we conduct meetings? Over to you.
Amanda, you want to tackle that first? You have lots to say on this.
I have a lot to say. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the thing that needs to change the most. I look at meetings in 3 different parts. One being like getting ready for meetings. So it's like the prep, like what are you doing ahead of time? Is your calendar organized enough that you are not delaying a conversation? You're not, everybody knows what they're going into the meeting for. And then I look at how you're running a meeting. So the like run portion of the meeting, and then the after part of a meeting, which is what I call results. I think one of the key parts of having an effective meeting is really in that readiness phase of building a meeting. Something that I see on a consistent basis, and I kind of now, after I've been spending so much time, sweating over meetings and researching and learning so much, is, those meetings that you get to and there's no agenda. You have no idea what the conversation's about. You're asking a lot of questions in the meeting. And I think that if that could just be one thing that could be fixed and people are, in that ready phase of like planning, I think that could solve a lot of problems as you go into the meeting. But oftentimes you don't have that. And that's what really causes a lot of conflict or delays efficiencies down the line.
So I would add from my perspective, I think, you all might remember from our last conversation, I'm a behavioral designer. And so one of the things that I find so fascinating about meetings is what's happening from a human behavior standpoint. And I actually think that what we want out of meetings has changed as we've moved more and more into hybrid and remote work. And the reality is I work from home full time. My team is fully remote, fully global. Amanda, I think your team is as well. And I think that the days of everyone being in the office and having the ability to problem solve quickly by going over to someone's desk or having a quick conversation in the kitchen or on the way to the restroom, we've lost those organic spaces to have just quick alignment chats. And I'm not a proponent, by the way, of like full-time back to work in the office. I just want to be super clear as I keep going on this thread, which is, I think now meetings have become a space for everything for us behaviorally. So we have our agenda, we have our key purpose and objective of the meeting, but we're also aligning and we're also brainstorming and problem solving. And what's happening is we're not getting good at calling out when we're deviating from the meeting's purpose. And so when you hear colleagues on a call realigning, we don't get that quick, hey, let's take this offline. Or when we start hearing brainstorming happening, it's like, whoa, like brainstorming requires its own meeting. Brainstorming is not an update or a quick chat. And so our behaviors and our needs for what a meeting is supposed to achieve, I think has expanded outside of what a meeting can realistically achieve. And we're not good at naming the type of meeting this is. Like we throw up update or we throw up workshop or something like that, but we're not clear what is the definition of that, and then what are the boundaries and parameters of this meeting, and who's going to call out when the type of thinking that's happening and the need that's being fulfilled, the itch that's being scratched, actually is no longer, sure, the topic is aligned with what we said this meeting is about, but we have gone into a different thinking modality, and this modality is not intended for this 30-minute block.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I apologize that I lost everything that Amanda said, except the very beginning. So my whole system froze here, and then I picked up everything that Michelle said. But can I connect the two? Because actually what I picked up from you, Amanda, at the very start was the 3 phases: the prep, the run the meeting, and the results. And Michelle, the part I've picked up from you is because of remote working, because we don't have the water cooler moments, because we don't have the occasional bumping into each other, the interpersonal catch-ups and so on, we now have a gap in our meetings, which is around the purpose and the type of meetings that we run. But if we take both of those points, Michelle, and if we map them onto the get ready for the meeting, run the meeting, and follow up at the end of the meeting, do those points that you've made, Michelle, map back onto those 3 different phases that Amanda is talking about?
I think they do completely, because for me, it's like, what are the behaviors needed and required in Amanda's 3 steps? And Amanda, I think you can say more about what happens in your 3 steps. And in my mind, there's like a sub element of each of the 3, which is modeling different types of meeting behaviors in the steps. So Amanda, like, I'd love to hear from you about like how you see that.
Yeah, so we have what I like to call the did system, which is it a discussion? Is it informational, or is it a decision? And so if you're able to go into a conversation, in the agenda, you have, this is purely a discussion, this is purely informational, or this is actually a decision-making conversation. I think that allows people to your point, Michelle, of like the behavior of going into the conversation with the mindset they need to have. So, hey, this is a decision-making meeting. We need this person and this person to weigh in. This person's the ultimate decision maker, and they're the ones that kind of bring it together. But oftentimes you go into a meeting thinking it's informational or a discussion, and the actual outcome is that you're trying to make a decision. And so then everything kind of goes awry and off the rails. And that's where I tend to see a lot of challenges along the way. So I think if you can stick to, it's that did system again, it's really helpful as it relates, because then as you think about the run, the ready, the results, you can kind of put those all together, right? Did it actually happen the way that it was supposed to at the ready? And if not, the results are going to tell you, well, we got to go backwards.
In some ways, guys, what both of you are saying, and maybe it's because I've been immersed in organization meetings for the last 15 years. That's where my headspace has been. And it sounds so basic, and it sounds so common sense. But my question to both of you then is, so why do people in organizations and in business, why do they not do these kind of relatively simple things? What's your experience of that one?
You want to go first, Amanda?
Sure. I have 2 pieces. I would say one thing that we see a lot in my one business as we're onboarding with new companies and things is there is not a consistent way across organizations of how to, whether you're scheduling or you're running a meeting, and there's not a lot of training. So then when you have people kind of popping, transitioning jobs, they're continuing to do what they thought that was the right way to do it as they go to the next place, and then the next place manages it differently. So, or they don't have any guidelines at all, and so I think that tends to be a challenge, is there's no like universal path or training. And then the second piece is oftentimes there's not a way to track how people are handling those things. And so then I always say that meetings are the most expensive part of an organization and the least tracked. And that's a problem. And I think that goes into, though, it's like why you can't shift those behaviors is simply that there's no way to know. You have no idea how people are handling their conversations, how they're preparing, that sort of thing.
Michelle,
And the other
you're taking that?
Yeah, the other piece I would add to this is meetings tend to be a symptom of organizational culture and behavior. And inevitably, whatever values are allowed or not allowed in the organization's culture are what shows up in meetings. And it's so fun because like within 5 minutes of joining a call with a client, I can usually tell what type of culture they have. And you know, Amanda, like there are a lot of best practices in meetings. You know, do we all know each other? Round of introductions. What's our agenda? But there's also the softer skills of like, are we joining on time? Who's joining late? Who has their camera off? Who has their camera on? Like all these small elements of accountability, ownership, authority, culture, in my mind, Martin, like is also really tied to, I think, why they don't get better. And to Amanda's point, so we don't monitor and track any of the stages of the meeting anyways. And then that culture piece is so powerful and so difficult to manage that I feel like meetings just become this like throwaway of like, that's just how we run them, or that's just how we are. And that's a cultural implication. And everybody knows that when we work on culture, like that is not a quick and easy fix. And so meetings become this like byproduct, I think, of cultural tendencies.
So we've touched on 3 key elements that in the last 60 episodes that Paul and myself have run, we've immersed into these 3: training, tracking, and culture. So let me loop back to training in the first instance. So training can happen in 2 places: inside the organizations or outside the organizations. Okay, so if we start with those, can you give us a sense of your experience of meeting training outside the organization? So generically in universities, in higher education establishments, in professional bodies and professional organizations, either the training in meetings or the lack of training, and equally within organizations, which will touch a bit into culture, but we'll come to that separately. So training inside and training outside, your experiences and your perspectives on that.
Oh, Amanda, I feel like this is your bread and butter.
Yeah, it's so tough. I think there is a big lack of training. I think it's a lot of like kind of learning on your own. So, you know, I worked in an office for 10 years. I was a part of the water cooler chat, you know, getting feedback real time, that sort of thing. And I never in those moments, the only feedback I ever gotten was a meeting was that I said too much. You know, the conversations were not flowing appropriately, or I was saying like too much. Other than those 2 things, I don't remember. And I love feedback. I want to improve. I'm definitely like a person of constant improvement. And I don't ever remember getting feedback other than those 2 things. So you kind of are just thrown to what you've got and learning from who you think emulates the way that you want to run a meeting. But to Michelle's point, not everybody runs meetings well, and you can identify culture challenges depending on where you are. So in that kind of, you know, it's like parenting and children, right? It's if you're watching what you think is best, and then you're taking that learning and kind of moving, and then you keep taking that with you to the next place. And until you're brought into an organization that truly has training, which I don't see a ton of, I think that there's, you know, 2-day webinars or 2-day meetings, that sort of thing. But I have not seen a ton of training related to internal.
But to your previous point, Amanda, so if organizations, if they don't they don't measure, they don't track, but they consume, like meetings consume. They consume time, energy, effort, emotion. So the organizations are giving up a huge amount to meetings, but they don't track, they don't monitor, and they don't train. My question to both of you is why? Why would they not? If they consume so much, what's the gap?
Michelle, I'll let you start with that one from a
Sure.
behavior side.
So I'll answer this question and the question you asked previously, Martin, because I think these are tied together. So similar to Amanda, internally, I think there is an expectation that your boss or your supervisor or your mentor is the one giving you feedback about meeting behavior. And like Amanda, I agree with the way you said it. And I feel like I'm thinking back across my professional career and in my early years, never did a training internally for sure. But I do feel like I had bosses at the time that were invested in developing me as a professional and probably were anecdotally sharing feedback about how to run a better meeting, you could have done this differently, etc. But externally, and getting a little bit more to your point, Martin, the best training I personally have done that has involved meetings but doesn't advertise itself this way is Scrum methodology. And Scrum is the only time that I have ever been trained in a boom, you have 15 minutes. These are the objectives, run it exactly like this, make sure everybody knows what they're doing. And I've been using Scrum as a technique for over 10 years now. And so that is and I work primarily in innovation and entrepreneurship. It's highly understood. I don't have to sell it. I get a lot of buy-in and I know how to run it well. And my team knows how to run it well.
Sure.
And I feel like that is kind of the only external space where I've been trained well to run meetings, but it's not highlighted as the purpose of the training. And that gets to your second question, which is, it feels like meetings is just this element of professionalism that we're all just supposed to know how to do.
Yeah.
And so any improvements to meetings are just supposed to come from like our own personal desire to run a more efficient meeting. And what's really interesting is like, I actually think that the Scrum methodology is a method that could be reframed into, here's how you run your most efficient meetings possible. But underneath that is all of the product development language, and I think all the language that is representative of where Scrum came from. And so there's a lost opportunity there to kind of position Scrum methodology as a meeting-oriented solution. So I don't know if that's helpful. Amanda, what do you think?
Martin, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead, Amanda. Yeah, go ahead.
I completely agree with all this, and I love the idea of the Scrum methodology. I've never thought about it that way. I think that if you could incorporate that and have that as a part of a training, I think would be ideal. We have one of the things that I've started to do, and it's now my wheels are kind of turning, is we've built out video training and guides of, here are the different parts of a meeting. Here's how to, and so it's essentially training them as they're getting through our platform. And so I'm now thinking about, how do I incorporate this into what that'll look like longer term.
But I'm curious, and again, we've touched on this in a couple of our previous episodes with other guests. I'm really curious about why third level education in particular, both undergraduate and postgraduate, pay no heed, at least in my experience of having been on both sides of third level, on the receiving end at each of the different levels and at the delivery side. And in all instances, I've never, ever encountered any form of meeting education of any description. And I scratch my head and go, but it's the absolute fundamental bedrock. When you take your very first assignment in your very first year and you say, so we'll put 5 new students together and you have your assignment and it's bedlam. And you say, why have we repeated that for the last 100 years of third level education? And we still haven't caught on, because that feeds into the culture piece, Amanda, I think. Because, you and Michelle, you made the point where you said, well, because people can talk, we all assume we can meet. And you kind of go, that doesn't necessarily follow. But if we take it to our fundamental third level education setup, you'd say, okay, if we're educating people for life, for work, for business, you say, okay, maybe if you school people on how to get together in the most productive way, and maybe if we, Michelle, is your suggestion, maybe if we use Scrum as an absolute baseline, no bells, no whistles, no fancy anything, but just basic intent. Take your 3 points, Amanda, to say prepare, run, review. Just those 3, and just put that into our third level education. But we don't. And my question is, why? What are we missing? What's gone wrong here, guys?
I think that people think that meetings are too complicated, and everybody has a different way. And so until you can get to exactly narrowing it down to, it's simple. It's this, these 3 parts, you can use this to make it work, and it can fit into any organization. And I think that that's the trouble, is there's always this idea of like, well, that won't work here. But it will, It's like, how do you fit it into working there? The run, the ready, the results, and the decision, the informed, and the decision or the discussion, like those 2 concepts are so simple and fall into either. But I do think that, to answer your question, I think everyone feels like it's too complicated to like make something work for all, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which is kind of fascinating, isn't it? And it's I concur with you, Amanda. It's the direct opposite. It can be simplified so simply. It can be brought down to such basic ideas. That let me go to so we've talked about the training piece. Let me just go to the tracking piece. So let's assume that we have meetings up and running. And Amanda, this is certainly into your area. Again, we've talked about this in the past. Our very good friend from Australia, Paul Kelvin McGrath.
Kelvin McGrath, yes. He created a score to predict how an organization could be in trouble just by listening to meeting feedback throughout the time, right?
Yeah, really a really fantastic application of technology in a really simplified form in order to measure and track meetings, but not meetings for their own sake. So the concept that he was using was to track what goes on inside meetings with a view to predicting the outcomes of what the meetings were being held for. So projects in particular was Kelvin's main focal area. And by tracking and monitoring what's going on in meetings with the participants, you have a much, much, much better chance of being able to predict, is the project itself going to run into challenges and problems and difficulties? And if so, you can preempt, and then you can avoid the catastrophe before it ever happens. But Amanda, I'd be really interested to hear your take on the tracking of meetings. What is it? What are we tracking? Why are we tracking it? What outcomes are we handling at the other end of the tracking?
So how I look at tracking, I look at it same thing with those 3 different parts of a meeting. I think you have to track, and you could be a person that is really great at getting prepped for your meeting. You're ready, you walk in, but when you get into the meeting, you're have a poor way of running it, or you have poor follow through. And so I think you have to track in a different way across all 3 of those kind of categories. And so how I have thought and built the tracking methodology is like, how are your agendas set up? Are people, so in the ready phase, I guess I should say, is are the attendees that are supposed to be coming actually coming? Do you have the appropriate meeting title? Do you have conflicts that will cause issues that will then cause a last minute delay, which that then causes meetings to push out and then projects are at risk or whatever that might look like. So I think that you have to track, or how I look at it is scoring across a variety of what we call measures to get an idea of like, are you actually prepared heading into your meeting? Are you good at preparing for your meeting? And then kind of looking at it also, did the meeting itself go the way that the agenda said it did? With so much technology now, there's such great ways of saying like, here's what the transcript said, here's what your agenda said.
Yeah.
Oh, your results aren't going to be great. We're going to need another follow-up. That's putting you at risk. That's like you're tracking behind or whatever it might look like. So that's kind of how I personally like to look at it, because I think everybody can improve or evolve differently based on where they are.
Cool. Michelle, thoughts on that?
Well, it's so interesting. I own 3 businesses, and I'm over here thinking to myself, gosh, I don't track meeting. And so, Amanda, this has been very, very fun and eye-opening for me as a business owner. I think we do more on the review piece, but it's the tracking that I guess across the 3 probably feels like it's the one that's lost. And I think more, like certainly more on the prep, because, depending on the meeting, you may have to prep. And then I think on the review, it's a little bit more intuitive to look back on a meeting and ask, did that serve its purpose? Okay, it didn't. Why? But it's the tracking piece that I just think is like that middle piece that's just not there.
Yeah, and can I just add to that, because what both of you have said there has prompted me just to reflect back on my own research into meetings. And I suppose what made my research unique, which is what they eventually end up giving you a PhD for, is because you find something a little bit different or a little bit new. And it was the idea of looking at meetings over time as a collective phenomenon. But obviously you can only do that by tracking the meetings. Now, I didn't go into the tracking piece because nobody had ever written or researched this idea of, yeah, but if you look at them all collectively as an organization production line, or you can view them actually as the skeleton around which the organization evolves, because as they are constantly taking place in different parts of the organization, now this feeds the culture, which both of you mentioned as key elements. So now the meetings become almost like the DNA of the organization. And both of you, again, made this idea around culture, that show me the meeting and I'll tell you what the culture of the organization is. And both of you are obviously expert enough that you'll see it, 10 minutes, 5 minutes of a meeting, you'll say, okay, I got it pegged. I like to use the phrase, meetings are the windows to the soul of the organization. In that context, again, I go back to my why. Why are organizations resistant to tracking their meetings? Is it fear? Is it lack of knowledge? Is it resource? What is it? Why not track? Because they track everything else to the paperclip. But we won't track meetings. Why? What's going on here, guys?
I personally, there is a mindset out there, and it's been like this for years, or forever really, is that you are producing if you have meetings, or you are effective if you have meetings. And so, but in my opinion, that's quite the opposite. I think if you have the ability to have a couple of very effective meetings and have more time to work, that is going to set you up for way more success than the opposite. So I think it's really just like, how do you shift people from feeling like being busy and being in meetings all day is what the way of the world should and has to be. And so until that starts or changes it has to come from the top down. And that's something that I say all the time if you want to track your meetings and really make change, unless the leaders of the organization are signed up to do that and be the leaders of that change, it won't ever happen. So I think that is my perspective on the why people don't.
Yeah, and that's the culture, isn't it? That's
It is.
essentially, Amanda, that's what's at the heart of that, our habitual way of doing things. And if it's not been positive with meetings, it needs the top to say we need to change here. Michelle, would you concur with that? You see it that way?
I do. I mean, someone on the call said that meetings are sort of like the DNA of the organization. So if you're going to start poking at meetings, you're poking at the DNA of the organization. We talked about popping the hood on the car. And I agree with Amanda completely that meetings are this long-standing performative indicator of output. And if we go back to our conversation in episode 59 about what Restore is trying to do, which is align the workday to cognitive performance, like Amanda's saying, this is a real shift in how we think about how you look at a successful workday. And I think so many of the techniques and tools that, for better or for worse, we're still using to monitor output and productivity. A lot of the questions that we ask about meetings, about the workday design, start probing deeper into the fact that a lot of these performative aspects of the workday don't deliver, and don't. And I think this is, we talk about expense, like talk about lost dollars in the meeting, like you said, Amanda, and then leadership has to justify why all these dollars are being lost at a meeting. And that is a conversation no one wants to have. I mean, I find organizations will do anything to not talk about the effectiveness of a meeting, because then they're justifying the lost funding that's happening by convening X number of leaders and stakeholders in a room. And actually, just a small anecdote, my other half is trained in a leadership method called tribal leadership. And meetings is one thing they specifically look at in tribal leadership. And he applied the principles to the company that he was currently working at. And he quantified the hours lost in ineffective meetings, and they implemented all of his policies.
Wow, super.
Yeah, it's a fantastic win on his part. But interestingly, he's tried to do it at other places since. And it's a special organization that is willing to hear that and make change on that.
And actually, that's been my experience in broader terms, not as specific as that, Michelle, but it's a very particular type of culture in an organization that embraces the possibility to track, monitor, lift the hood, have a look underneath, and B, to implement, to kind of soul search, having soul searched, identify we're not doing this very well, and then have the courage to say, do you know what, let's try something a bit different. There's not that many organizations that are like that. A lot say they are,
and they're not.
But in my experience,
an
awful lot.
I have just to remind us all about the time, Martin, and before we go, just as Martin going to prepare his wrap up, I would like to introduce here the technology of today, AI, in order to hear the views of our guest speakers on how do you think AI could impact the way we run meetings. Ladies, who wants to go first?
I can go first, or go ahead, Michelle. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think Amanda can speak more authoritatively on this, but I can speak more from what we're doing at our companies, which is we are using AI to make a lot of process improvements and optimization improvements. And one of the things that feels very intuitive to me is now across all the different types of tech I use, Zoom, Google Meet, etc., I get that AI generated output of my meeting, and they're getting really good. I mean, I remember the days where you would get, you'd be paying for a third party and you'd get it and you'd be like, okay, I don't even understand half of this. And now they're quite sharp and they're effective. And I actually use them in a way that I didn't use them before. But what we've been doing is using AI to kind of bridge where there are learning gaps on our part. And it seems intuitive to me. And so, Amanda, I'm almost asking you this as a question, that you would be able to design a way to feed your meeting notes through a pipe, a funnel like Zapier, into an LLM who's been tasked with find inadequacies in this meeting, find the weak spots, where are there big gaps where we went way off topic. And then you just get that report in your inbox. And it feels like that might be where we're going. Amanda, like, do you see that?
So funny enough, we are, so as I kind of talked about the ready, the run, the results, we're building those three things into our platform. So the ready is where we're in a beta testing right now. And I just have to share a funny thing in terms of a behavior change, but we were just onboarding a client this week as a beta client. And he said to me, before he got his calendar connected, he said, so should I go and audit my meetings first to make sure that they're cleaned up and ready to go before I go in? And I said, no, that's not the point. We got to see where you are. But I thought that was like such a fun thing for me, because I was like, this is what I want. Like, this is the behavior change that I need people to see and for them to know that it's going to be available. So that's like our current ready phase of our product right now. But how we're building out the next phases of the product is exactly how you described it, Michelle. The run portion, having a transcription, tracking that. What does that look like? How does that look against the agenda that was established? Did it actually touch on everything? And then, with the action side of things, the results, do we need another follow-up meeting? And the tool should be able to then tell you exactly that, hey, we noticed you didn't get to all your agenda items. We're going to schedule you another meeting next week to cover this. Or, hey, you guys said this was a decision meeting. There was a lot of discussion. We're going to have to schedule another conversation. And so those are the things that you can track and score. And it kind of goes back then to being able to see how people within your organization are being effective. Do they have gaps in running a meeting or preparing? And that's where more training can be identified for people within the org.
And close that loop, that feedback.
Exactly.
Loop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we have to go, dear friends. It's otherwise we're going to miss viewers on LinkedIn. As you know, there's this magic 45 minutes threshold where people start to drop off. And
fascinating conversation, guys. I'll do a quick roundup, if I may. We started, Amanda, with 3 key points that you say. So there's the preparation for meetings, there's the running of meetings, and then there's the review or the after action of meetings. Michelle, you touched on a key point, actually, that because of the evolution of remote working over the last 4 or 5 years, there's a whole lot of social connection that has been missed in workplaces. And there might now be a trend where meetings are becoming a surrogate for face-to-face in workplace encounters. And that in itself may be throwing up significant problems with meetings that were to a lesser extent in the past, but might be amplified now because of that gap that the remote working is causing. Mindful of that, Amanda, you touched then into the idea of the mapping of behaviors throughout the phasing, these 3 phases that meetings would typically go through. And you suggested the DID. So is the meeting itself a type of, is it for discussion? Is it for information? Or is it for decision making? So understanding that about each meeting becomes critical then to, are we staying on topic? Are we staying focused? Or are we spinning our wheels and wasting time on decisions when actually we don't have decision makers here? Or are we having information that we could have shared before the meeting, but we're now consuming everybody's time needlessly? So that framework of DID could be really powerful to help channel and focus people's time. We then touched on 3 things that seem to be missing: no training, no tracking, and meetings reflect the organization's culture. We branched out in the training piece to talk about internal versus external training. And so it's a hobby horse of my own, but certainly the idea of third level not covering basic meeting methodology. Michelle, you suggested Scrum. Pick one, but you suggested Scrum, and just use that as a basic bottom line for how you could build good, solid meeting methodology. The idea of organizations not having internal training was the second point. We didn't really expand on that in a huge detail, but we did segue into culture, because that may be a reflection of the culture in many organizations. Because we said, why do organizations not invest in meetings? And Amanda, I think you suggested it may well be because people assume that if we're doing meetings, we're doing stuff. And actually, not unless we track it, monitor it, measure it, and feedback on it. So that idea that each of the 3 areas of preparation, run it and review it, each of the DID in terms of the focus of the meeting, and then the possibility to track and monitor each of those 3 elements gives us the potential to vastly improve the meetings that we have. And then we finally looped back to the key core, which is the whole culture piece. In order to do the tracking, the monitoring, the reviewing, the feedback, the culture has to be willing to take that on. And if the culture isn't such that it's willing to be reflective, then there's a really good chance we'll be just throwing snow at a very warm wall. It's just not going to stick. Paul, your final question was around AI. We certainly touched on this in the last 60 episodes, there's no question. And it's amazing to see, even in just the last year, to see how AI has progressed with being able to interpret both, just the spoken language, produce transcript, produce edited and distilled information coming out the other end. And Michelle, your suggestion of how AI potentially can be used to do the roundups, and then Amanda to go to your proposition to say those roundups compared to what we started with, what was at the preparation versus what's coming out of the review, compare and contrast, and that gives us a potential agenda for continuous improvement in how we perform our meetings. I'll wrap it at that. I hope that did some justice or service to the wonderful conversation that we had.
Yeah, amazing, Martin. Well done, and thank you, dear colleagues, for joining this conversation. I will give you the 30-second golden nugget to each of you, Michelle and Amanda, before we wrap up. And dear viewers who are watching, if you have trouble with your meetings, pay attention to these 2 companies, Restore and Meeting Score. I think you'll be surprised. Over to you, Michelle and Amanda, for golden nugget on the conversation, and we have to end the program now.
My golden nugget on the conversation. I continue honestly to be amazed by Martin's wrap-ups. I mean, I can tell that Martin is an expert in meetings when I hear his wrap-up. And I think maybe my golden nugget, now that I've heard it twice, Martin, is like, first of all, it's a skill to be able to synthesize information and listen the way you're listening. And secondly, I think you model a really excellent behavior with that wrap up, which is you clearly took good notes, you listened, we achieved our objective. And after 2 sessions now, I'm sort of like, I am walking away with Martin as my key takeaway. Talk about modeling meeting behavior. I mean, I think Martin for the win there.
I concur with Michelle. I think, I agree with the way that you have the ability to wrap up. It was perfect. One of the things that I loved that I'm going to take away from this dialogue is really about it's the training side of things. How, where where does that come from? Like, why do we not have it? I'm starting to go back to my college days of what were we doing? Why didn't, why were they not training us in this? It's such a key part of any company, and it really could start so early on. I think you could even start it in high school, honestly, going into college and then into the workforce. So that's something that really, really deeply resonated with me today.
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you, dear viewers, for your patience watching so far. I believe you'll be like me, fascinated by what we learned today. Thank you so much. Episode 60, I think we made it, Martin.
Absolutely. Yeah, well done, guys. Thank you very much. Fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Michelle. You are in my heart now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Good to see you both again.